Good morning. It's 3 minutes after 10, and I suppose it's tempting in some quarters to reflect upon the length of the waiting lists for ordinary cancer patients or to wonder at the scale of the news coverage. But you'll forgive me, I hope, for not doing that today. I do understand why some people do, and I do understand the Republican impulse. But wherever you are, whoever you be, at 6 o'clock, if you had the news on yesterday at 6 o'clock when the BBC announced that they had just been informed that King Charles has cancer, you will have been stopped in your tracks. You will have called people in from the... Now, don't at me to tell me that you didn't, all right? This is what is called generalising. The fact that you didn't call your husband in from the kitchen where he was slaving over a hot stove because it had just been announced on the news that the king has cancer doesn't undermine my generalisations. It's the kind of story that stops the proverbial traffic. It makes you reflect on lots of things. It made me reflect on the astonishing rehabilitation of reputation that King Charles has enjoyed since his late wife Diana, Princess of Wales, passed away, when he was very much persona non grata, and the current Queen was one of the least popular people in the country. You look at that extraordinary exercise in media. I don't want to say manipulation, that feels a little unkind, but control. You don't have control. What would you call it? Media relations. There we go. That astonishing exercise in media relations that has seen one of the most popular members of the royal family rendered persona non grata for the crime of falling in love with a woman of colour and sticking up for himself, while previously hugely unpopular members of the royal family have, thanks largely to the patronage and support of Fleet Street and newspaper editors, have ended up in clover. But again, today's not the day for that. Apart from Manchester United fans, people will not understand why I thought of Eric Cantona shortly after the news of King Charles broke last night. Unless you pay more attention to this programme than is healthy, you won't know why I thought of Eric Cantona. And to be fair, the only people who pay more attention to this programme than is healthy are generally the people who profess to hate it. So unless you have almost got a permanent note being taken of what we're doing here, you won't know why I thought of Eric Cantona shortly after the news of King Charles broke. And the reason why I found myself thinking of Eric Cantona shortly after the news of King Charles's cancer broke last night is because Eric Cantona is the only person I have ever met who truly believes he's not going to die. I interviewed him some years ago. It was an extraordinary experience in many ways. But there were moments of connection during that encounter. I was with him for about an hour. There were moments of connection during that encounter. And I think we got onto the question of legacy. We must have got onto the question of what he felt his proudest achievements were and what he felt he was going to leave behind. And listen, whether you follow football or not, there is a status achieved by a precious few players that is quasi-religious. You know, the regard in which Eric Cantona was held in Manchester and formerly in Leeds really can only be expressed in sort of semi-spiritual terms. And to enjoy that level of adulation, that level of reverence from fellow humans, it must do something to a chap. There's a chicken and egg element to it as well. Do you have to be possessed of a remarkable personality to achieve that sort of status? Or does achieving that sort of status do something to your personality that the rest of us can only speculate about, or if you're made in a slightly weird way, dream of? So I asked him about legacy. I asked him about what he thinks his proudest achievement would be, what he thinks he would be most remembered for. And he turned to me and he looked at me as if I was slightly unhinged. He looked at me as if I'd asked him a really strange question. And he said to me, hand on heart, he said to me, I am not going to die. And I've always remembered that. And whenever intimations of mortality arrive unheralded, unexpectedly, smack in the middle of your own existence, when, for example, you lose a friend far too early, which I've suffered the horror of relatively recently, not for the first time either. Whenever you are, if you like, hit around the back of the head by the fundamental truth of mortality, I, for some mad reason, always find myself thinking of Eric Cantona. And I did last night, because that 6 o'clock news opening, we have just received news from Buckingham Palace that the King has cancer. It stops you in your tracks. Whether you're on royalist tracks, Republican tracks, ambivalent tracks, it stops you in your tracks. And the second thing I thought of after thinking about mortality, and then shortly after that thinking about Eric Cantona's ability somehow to honestly believe that he's never going to die. To be fair to Eric Cantona, I mean, he's true so far. He's got it right so far, hasn't he? He is still with us. But then the second thing you think of is, what is that moment like? When you sit there in a hospital room or a doctor's surgery or wherever it may be, and you are given the news that, well, I'm afraid I'm going to deploy a cliche at this point, prince or pauper, king or commoner, that news lands in your life with exactly the same impact, doesn't it? Exactly the same levels of shock or horror. What a leveler it is, in fact, that moment, that nanosecond of information delivery. King, palaces, untold riches, privilege the rest of us can only dream of. And yet in that moment, he has no VIP track to follow. Okay, he'll get different levels of treatment from those that most of us can expect. But there's no VIP treatment. There's no opt-out. There's no velvet rope that he can snuck behind in order to avoid the full impacts of this diagnosis. He, in that moment, is exactly the same as the rest of us. And I wonder what goes through your mind in that minute, in that moment. What is that like? How many times have I said to you that the subjects I find most engaging, the things I enjoy talking to you about most, in some ways, are the ones about which you know nothing until suddenly you need to know everything. It was a penny that dropped when we were talking about care, finding care for an elderly parent. You know absolutely nothing about it. Doesn't matter how many times I do it on the show. Doesn't matter how many times Sheila does it. Doesn't matter how many conversations we have about finding care for your elderly parent or your partner, your wife, your husband. Until you actually have to do it, you know nothing. And at the minute you have to do it, you suddenly need to know everything. And this is like an emotional equivalent of that. I don't think you can ever fully imagine how, whether you are Mr. or Mrs. Empathy, or whether you never spare a fig for anybody else's welfare. You're the kind of person perhaps who'd place a bet upon the fate of refugees, so complete is your detachment from humanity and decency. But whether you're like that, or whether you are someone who dedicates your life to helping other people, we can never know. We can never know. 12 minutes after 10 is the time. If you detected a little snigger in my voice there, it's because Paul in Enfield, no, it's not Paul in Enfield, it's an unsigned text that is today in the... do you know what Memento Mori is? Do you know what Memento Mori is? Quite appropriate, given that we're talking about mortality, and Eric Cantona is the only person who I've ever met who honestly seemed to think he's never going to die. Memento Mori they are the words uttered into the ear of a victorious Roman general as he made his way back into Rome. I think it would fall to a slave to whisper into the Roman general's ear, Memento Mori. Remember, you are mortal. And of course, what it's designed to do is to prick your pomposity, to dilute your self-importance, to remind you that you are just another human being, in the same way that a cancer diagnosis would. So having Memento Mori whispered in your ear reminds you that ultimately from dust we come and to dust we shall return. But whoever sent this text to me in the middle of that quite highfalutin attempt to knit Eric Cantona, the King's cancer diagnosis, and the very nature of mortality itself into a rich tapestry of radio, whoever sent that text has just served exactly the same purpose as that Roman slave used to do a couple of thousand years ago. They texted me the words, "Is Eric Cantona Welsh?" No, that was my French accent, but thank you for getting in touch. So, what is that like? What would King Charles have gone through yesterday? And we don't know at this stage how serious the diagnosis is. The palace is, of course, leaning towards optimism. And there's no precedent for this, really, for anybody alive. The late Queen when she passed in old age. So the idea of what the media does when a monarch is in this sort of peril is not something that the guidebook has been written for. And therefore, you can't read too much into it. It's tempting to think, well, the papers must know something we don't because they've given it 6 pages today. It's one step down from an obituary. Prince Harry's flying back from California. He wouldn't be doing that if it was just a melanoma. We don't know. We know nothing. And I'll let you into a little secret. You won't hear any on this show, actually, with the exception of Peter Hunt, who's always worth listening to and really knows what's what. With the exception of Peter Hunt and possibly one or two others, all of the people lined up to talk to you under the description royal expert know exactly the same amount of information about this story that you do. I know what you're thinking, James, I don't know anything. Yes, exactly. And now here is royal expert, Rory Tuffington Buffing. They know nothing. Do you not remember that sting a couple of years ago when those two cheeky chappies, whose names temporarily eluded, Archie Manners and Josh someone, lined up a bunch of royal experts to comment on a programme that they hadn't seen, and they all did so happily in return for a generous cheque. That is what they do. Now here is royal expert Keith Tuffington-Jones to tell us what can we learn from the fact that Prince Harry is returning from California to be by his father's bedside. Well, James. So they know nothing either. But you do. You know what it's like in that moment, in that room, in that space. I just want you to tell me what happens. I don't know why. That's where my mind has gone this morning. I don't know whether it's curiosity or some sort of acknowledgement of my own mortality. 50 is bigger than 40, isn't it? I don't know whether you find this, if you've passed it yet. 50 is a bigger milestone than 40. It was 40 when I was growing up, but 50 is the one where you sort of feel you almost certainly passed half time now. However things play out, that's your last half-time orange. You're not getting another one of those. And you start thinking about this stuff. What I want to know is what it is like. Just in that minute, in that moment. I'm going to get the phone lines open now. 0345 6060 973. And it's almost before you know how serious it is. Do you see what I mean? It's that word, that unique word, cancer. What is it like when it is delivered to you or to your loved one? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Because unless you've been there, you've got no idea. This is, for people who are a little embarrassed to realise they don't follow the programme closely enough to have seen the Eric Cantona point coming, but this is a very good example of the what was it like principle, isn't it? What was it like? That apparently silly question that actually cuts to the heart of almost every conversation that we actually have. I don't know what it's like. You do. Tell me. 0345 6060 973. I think I may have misused the word melanoma a moment ago. I'm thinking of a friend of mine who's recently had a freckle removed, which was potentially dangerous, and it was a relatively straightforward operation. So apologies for that. No prizes for guessing that. I've got no medical qualifications whatsoever. But you know what I mean. The word cancer can cover a multitude of conditions. And in that minute in that second when you first hear the word, I want to know what it's like. The time is 10:17. It is 20 minutes after 10. Apologies if you can't get through. I promise you'll be able to shortly. We will work through the calls that are waiting, but I do just want to read a quick text. Do you know, normally a text that ends with the word shame on you goes straight in the bin. But you've got me with this, and I think I owe you an apology. James, there are no words which can amply describe what it's like to be told that news. I know this personally. All is well now, happily, as do my father, both of my in-laws, and my 9-year-old nephew, all of whom have passed. What is different is that being the king and being the rest of us, what we respectively hear when we are told is worlds apart. Some commentators have stated that it's right and proper for the king to get quick, preferential and superior treatment. For his subjects, we now have one of the worst cancer survival rates in the world and a truly wonderful NHS under immense strain. You disappoint me that you won't tackle this today and that you dismissed it so irreverently during your opening monologue. Shame on you. I think I deserve that, actually. My defence will be just today. I want to talk about a different element of it. I want to talk about the moment of delivery, the moment of diagnosis. But I promise you now, having read that and similar messages coming in, we will turn our attention at the first opportunity to the gulf between what you can expect the moment after diagnosis and what the king can expect. I am standing by the decision that that's not the conversation for today, but it is most definitely the conversation for tomorrow or soon, and for the rest of your life, for Casablanca fans. 22 minutes after 10 is the time. Sharon's in Croydon. Sharon, what made you pick up the phone?
Morning, James.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm just driving from the hospital, actually, and what grabbed me was the fact, your question around how, what was the impact when you're first told.
Yes.
And I don't think there are words to describe what happens when you're told that. I mean, my jaw just dropped when I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2022, and
did you know? So you go into the room knowing that it's a yes or a no? You're waiting. No.
Well, I was the week before I should have been given my diagnosis, but I was told not all of the results were back. But what I was told was it's suspicious.
Okay.
So you go away thinking, oh gosh, what does that mean? Oh no, surely not, kind of thing. Because you read a lot of the information that's out there, which isn't always great, I must admit, and they try and encourage you that it could be a cyst. Kind of thing. So that's what I was thinking all the time. Oh, it's a cyst, blah, blah, blah. So when I was sent away, I thought, oh, gosh, another week kind of thing. And I remember the doctor said to me, do you want me to phone you? And I said, no, I don't want any information over the phone. I
want it face-to-face.
I want it face-to-face. And what stuck with me, I think, was the fact that I was told, bring somebody with you this time. Because I just rocked up, James. I just thought, okay, blah, 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 kind of thing. So my cousin and my husband came with me, and we went into the room. And, I mean, there were no airs or graces around. It was just kind of like, yes, it's cancer, and, well done for coming in early and everything else. And this is the treatment path kind of thing. And then I was sent off with a breast nurse, really. I mean, it felt very much like that. I think we were in the room for a good 5-10 minutes. My jaw dropped. And
You're dazed, are you? Or you think it's a bit like bereavement, perhaps? You can't quite believe that it's happening. It feels somehow as if you're watching the events I don't know.
It does feel that you're not part of something. I mean, and
the doctors were sensitive. The person who told you handled it sensitively.
I think they're sensitive enough, but for me,
they do
it's
it
not
every
like
day.
you're just on a conveyor belt. You're in and out. There were so many women in the waiting room, waiting kind of thing. So you just felt like you're in, that's a diagnosis.
That's the weird thing about a lot of profound things that happen in our lives, that the people with whom they are happening, or the people under whose authority they are happening, do it several times a day, whether it's a doctor or an undertaker. For you, it's one of the single most significant moments of your entire life. For them, it's not even the only time they're doing it in that day or that hour. It's extraordinary. Sharon, I know that you're on the up and up, so I'm very glad about that. Some people manage, of course, to see the humour in the strangest circumstances. Mac's been in touch to say a friend of mine was diagnosed with stomach cancer, James. He was told that if they didn't operate, he'd have just 6 months to live. His wife burst into tears. The doctor asked if he had any questions, and he said, it's not a 2-year waiting list, is it? His wife slapped him across the head. I don't know what to make of that. But, Gary's in Dartford. Gary, what would you like to say?
Hello there, James.
Hi, mate.
Yeah, just calling. Calling up today just to share my experience of being diagnosed with testicular cancer. I was walking into hospitals as everyone else was walking out in March 2020.
Good Lord, yes.
Yeah, so my experience, James, was really one of shock, a bit like your last caller.
Tell me about going into the room. Do you know what you're there for? You know that you're there for a yay or a nay? Because with the King, I think they found it while looking for something else, didn't they? Or they found it while dealing with something else. But did you know that you were having, like the last caller, you were having a lump essentially analysed or not?
You're absolutely right. So, my situation, that they also thought it could be a cyst, James.
Yes.
So it started, a cyst on the 19th of January 2020 was literally a tiny, small pimple.
Right.
And by the time my right testicle was removed 8 weeks later, it was the weight and size of a hockey ball.
Hockey ball's not the most helpful analogy. I haven't played hockey for
cricket.
There we go. Good Lord, seriously. I told you we'd find a little bit of humour in everything, Gary. And here we are, comparing balls. So, no, a cricket ball, I have a mental image. Good Lord. So if they hadn't got it when they got it, well, yeah, I mean, you weren't going to miss it, were you, in those circumstances? But goodness me. And what did you feel when they told you what it was? What goes through your head? The worst, I imagine.
It does. And as I said to your researcher just now, it's very strange, James, because initially it's shock. It's sort of a little tear in the eye of, my goodness, is this it? And then there's a really weird moment, for me anyway, of gratitude, of like, if I get through this, I've got another shot at this sort of second round.
Wow.
So it's a really weird mix of emotion.
And have you changed your ways in any way? Have you started taking an advantage of that second round? Or have you just sort of carried on as you were with a little bit more gratitude in your soul?
I would say both. So it's both of those things. So yeah, let's just put it this way. I speak up, I challenge things, I'm much more disruptive in my day job. So yes, my outlook on life is much more open than it was before.
Because you become reprogrammed almost to the what the Cantona element, that idea that actually, no, I'm not going to be here forever. So make it count a bit more. Make it count.
Absolutely.
Wow. Gary, I love that. Thank you. I crikey, I hadn't even thought of that. And I'm fully aware that for some people, the opposite impact, because you don't get a second chance. You are finding out that that's it. You're in last chance saloon. Gary, take care. 28 after 10 is the time. Louise is in Winsford in Cheshire. Louise, what would you like to say?
So I was diagnosed with breast cancer in August last year. I finished my treatment 3 weeks ago now.
Gosh.
Big up for the NHS screening programme. So I actually had a call for my first mammogram.
Right.
And went there and thought, okay, it's fine. Got a recall.
And that's because of your age, is it? You just
because of my age.
Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. Just because of my age. Didn't
so always
feel anything,
go to those appointments.
Anything. Yes. And then got a recall. Lots of ladies the same age at work. Oh, yes, we had a recall. Very common for the first one.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, had the second mammogram, and they went, well, we just want to do a biopsy. Okay. And me being me, the lady in the biopsy was amazing, but I just kept asking her question after question after question. And at one point she stopped and she said, listen, I'm trained to be very gentle with patients and very considerate, but you seem to want to know what's going on.
Yes.
Do you?
Right.
And I said, yes. And she said, you've got breast cancer.
Whoa.
And so I then had 2 weeks to get my formal results. And the awful thing was I lost my mum to womb cancer about 2 years before and developed some really bad health anxiety from it as well.
Of course you did.
But there's something that's stuck with me in terms of my diagnosis in breast cancer that the lady performing the biopsy said, which was, wombs are not boobs, Louise. Wombs are not boobs. They're very different. And I found that, when I went to the actual appointment where they confirmed that I had got breast cancer, the amount of information they could tell me about what type it was, what they were going to do to me, what the next steps were, was incredibly comforting. And I think it has been all the way through. The breast cancer nurses from Macmillan that are in a lot of NHS hospitals are formidable. And it's really only now that I'm coming out of treatment that I'm suddenly terrified or scared or vulnerable.
So that's the intimations of mortality kicking in hard because you've moved into a space where there's room for them. When you're in treatment and dealing with it, there's no space for those ruminations.
Yeah, I listen to you every day, James.
Oh, Lord.
I read a mountain
Haven't
of
you
books.
suffered enough?
No, I read a mountain of books. There's a lot of focusing on what the very next step was. And the NHS were really good at they gave me loads of amazing literature and booklets, but only for the next step.
Okay.
And then only to the next step after that. So I wasn't overwhelmed and I wasn't swamped. And I have to say now that I go to the Christie at Manchester, an amazing cancer hospital. And we have a course now on Thursday, 2 hours every Thursday afternoon, where about 12 of us that have just come through the same amount of treatment for breast cancer sit with some very qualified people and go through things like mindfulness and well-being and coping strategies. So I have to say, big up to the NHS all the way through this.
And to the Christie in particular, and indeed to the people recognising the importance of the stuff you've just described, sometimes in the face of great cynicism and scepticism. But, the idea that well-being or wellness could be a controversial issue is extraordinary, but of course par for the course in tabloid Britain. Thank you, Louise. It's 10:31. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. I was in the room, writes Verity, when my mum was diagnosed. I was 13, and it was unexpected. They were already speaking about her treatment before actually giving her the diagnosis. It was a complete shock, and my vision started to narrow. It's the only time in my life that I fainted. Good grief. Next thing I remember is the nurse speaking to me. I don't remember much after that. In an attempt at normality, we went to the supermarket to do the weekly shop. My dad cried in the car, and I was randomly, violently sick outside the entrance. It was horrific. I thought I was going to lose my mum. I have very few memories from the year that followed. Thankfully, mum went into remission and has been here for the last 28 years. Gosh. And this, as well, I think, speaks to that text I read out earlier about the slight misjudgment on my part of saying today we will leave out of our conversation comparisons between what King Charles can expect in the context of his cancer diagnosis and what his mere subjects can expect in similar circumstances. This rather drives the point home. Hi, James. My dad was given his lung cancer diagnosis on a busy ward with curtains pulled around his bed. He wasn't even taken into a private room. It was absolutely horrific. Basically, they delivered a death sentence and no treatment was given to him that night. So why couldn't they have let him come home to digest the information? He died 4 months later. 10:37 is the time. Sue's in Wimborne. Sue, what would you like to say?
Hello.
Hi, Sue.
Good to talk to you. I'm on day 2 of chemo. So I started my chemo the same day as the King. My voice is a little bit shaky because obviously my body's taken an insult.
Yes.
I was diagnosed, however, unlike the King. I was diagnosed on the 16th of December.
Right.
So I've waited 50 days to have my treatment.
And should it have started ASAP, Sue? In an ideal world, would it have started soon?
In an ideal world, I think it would have done, although I have spoken to somebody who had private medical insurance, and she was diagnosed on the Monday, and she started her chemo on the Tuesday, and she told me she was still in shock.
Yes.
So I think, I had 50 days of waiting, 50 days of night terrors. But on the other hand, I had 50 days to come to terms with this life-changing information and to be able to communicate it to my family, which obviously is very important. So 50 days is not ideal, but those 50 days have been very important to me. The moment of delivery was very important, and I suspect it's different for different people.
Of course.
I worked for the health service for 30 years as a clinical psychologist.
Right.
So for me, I kind of knew what was coming. I kind of informed myself and got online and looked at my own notes with my GP's permission.
Right.
But still there is this moment when you look someone in the eye and they tell you either have months or very limited years to live. And
what did they tell you, Sue, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I have primary bowel cancer, but the problem is it spread to my liver and it is inoperable, or at least that was what I was told at the time. And they don't necessarily tell you that, how long you have to live.
Okay.
And of course, not everybody wants to know. I think the important thing is that we all cope with these things differently, really, and they are sensitive to that. So my experience was that they began by asking me what my understanding was of my condition, and then they kind of pitch it to how much you already know and really what you want to know. And I'm a person who wants to take ownership,
Yes.
not only of my illness and the management of that, but also my life, because if I only have a limited time, it's very important to me, as your earlier caller said, that that time is value-driven, that I use it to the best of my ability. I have no religious beliefs, but I do have a sort of strong connection to having a life that's value-driven, knowing what's important to you and what you want to be remembered for, and what sort of person you want to be. So,
and all of that has come into even sharper focus than it was
absolutely,
before.
Absolutely. So they told me, and in terms of the moment, it is exactly as people have described.
Yes.
Your attention becomes enormously focused. I can still feel and see the eyes of this very young, compassionate medic.
Yeah.
I could feel her struggle in kind of delivering this, and I have to say I'm very grateful to her. It felt like, although my husband was in the room, it felt like it was just her and I for a moment.
Of course.
And I felt very connected to her. And then there's a kind of opening up to the reality, but it takes a while. Both my husband was with me. He's been an absolute rock, as has the family. The wonderful thing in every piece, in every moment, there are kind of treasures and nuggets of gold. And I can say, in all honesty, I have never felt so loved and so cared for in my life before. So, you know, in terms of quality of life, it's been a nightmare. But for me, I've been surrounded by a cushion of care and love. And even in the chemo room yesterday, with the women with their turbans and wigs and ringing their bells for their last chemo, there's enormous potential for care and intimacy.
And humanity, I'm hearing, Sue. Really.
Absolutely, absolutely. More, I mean, you know, I've worked with people in mental health, but this experience of kind of reaching out and finding that there is this cushion of love there to support you.
It's a beautiful phrase.
It's very real as well. I decided if I was going to do this, that I was going to square up to it in a very kind of honest and authentic way, and that meant no pretense, really.
That's coming across crystal clear. Actually, this is all out there, isn't it, for you, Sue?
Yeah, and it's what you realise is it's a tough ask.
Yeah.
Some people can cope with it. Other people would like to kind of laugh their way through it with you, which sometimes is good and sometimes is not possible. But what I got back by kind of just being open and honest is things I couldn't have anticipated, people telling me what I've meant in their life to them. You know, and friendship and support, and also from complete strangers.
Gosh.
So the woman who had chemo the day after, that was lucky enough to have medical insurance that gave her the very quick treatment, sent me a backpack for my first chemo. I've never met this woman.
Gosh.
I've only spoken to her on the phone about her experience. She was a friend of a friend. and a backpack arrived in the post ready for me to go for my first treatment. And I feel a strong connection to some people who are just strangers.
In a way, we're strangers, and you are a stranger to everybody listening to this program. But in another very real way, you've just connected with them in a powerful and valuable way, Sue. So
that's why I phoned, really. And I think the important thing I also wanted to say is it'll be different for different people, because this is my way of coping to it. Squaring up, informing myself, being open and honest. The woman who sent me the backpack said she only cried twice. She didn't want to know anything about her treatment. She went on working. She just had a completely different style to me. There is no right or wrong to this. No. Human beings cope in different ways. And
you need to give yourself the space to work out what's best for you, don't you?
You do. But what I think has been a big difference for me is that opening up to people and has enabled me to get all this cushion of love and support around me. And the people I worry about are the people that go home after their chemo, go home after their diagnosis, and maybe haven't got keep a lid and haven't got the resources and not the arm to reach out in the middle of the night when you wake up and your mind says you're terminally ill.
Sue, I'm going to leave your words resonating there, and I'm going to read a text that has come in from someone who was asked to remain anonymous, but I want him or her to keep those words in mind, to keep your words in mind about the importance of having someone to reach out for, and knowing that the people who love you and the people around you know what's going on. But before I read that, can I just say thank you to you? Is that all right?
Yes.
For sharing all that, and good luck.
Well, thank you so much for allowing me to.
Hey, it's my privilege in a way, because an awful lot of people probably needed to hear that, and those of us who didn't necessarily need to hear it will be very grateful that we did. Sue, do take care, and remember what Sue just said, because I wasn't quite sure how to handle this text. James, I was given a cancer diagnosis 2 weeks ago, a lump on my kidney. Apparently it has been growing for at least 4 years. The first thought I had was not to tell my boys until I have to. They are living their best life, and I don't want them to worry. Please don't say my name. Hey, you do what's right for you. As Sue said, there's no right and there's no wrong in this. And I don't know how old your boys are. But if you were my dad, who is not here anymore, I would not want you to be facing this alone. Maybe not today, James, writes Chris, but soon it will need to be acknowledged that all the talk about how important it is to get an early diagnosis and treatment of cancer will ring a bit hollow to those people struggling to do just that on the NHS. And indeed, Cameron's been in touch from Nine Elms on a similar theme. I feel the need to text you, James, as I can't ring in because I'll cry instantly. I lost my dad on November the 26th last year with a short illness. Pancreatic cancer. He waited for almost 2 weeks to be treated for jaundice and was met with delay after delay for treatment. I sit here now and wonder if he had been treated sooner, whether he would still be with us today. One part of me does believe that King Charles won't have the same issue. I miss Dad every day, and his story, along with the other experiences shared today, have made me tearful. But thank you for speaking about it. You have helped me through the darkest times. That's a lovely thing to say, Cameron, but it does. I always feel that quite heavily. 10:53. You take care of yourself, mate. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the moment of diagnosis is where the conversation began, but it has perhaps inevitably, and I've already apologised for perhaps missing the importance and the relevance of this. It does also lead to comparisons. 50 days, for example, between diagnosis and treatment is unlikely to be something that King Charles endures or has to endure. And we will talk about that more specifically and more directly before the week is out, I promise you. Lily is in Fadderley in Cheshire. Lily, what would you like to say?
Hey, James.
Hey, Lily.
I come at this from a different, well, both perspectives of having been told I had cancer when my children were young and now losing my beloved 56-year-old husband to it. So it's much harder. I found it much harder to cope with him. And the diagnosis was much tougher to be told somebody that I loved more than anything would have to go through what I did.
Tough. Okay, that's love, isn't it? Really, I suppose that's wanting the person you love to be spared the pain that you know is coming. Yeah,
and knowing, I think, because his was a much tougher diagnosis than mine, and he fought and didn't think for 1 minute that he wouldn't survive it, but I knew he wouldn't. I had to fight with him, and he didn't want me to tell anybody because he was so proud and he thought he would be coming back and carrying on. So I couldn't really. I needed because I didn't want him to think that I thought any different.
So it's a terrible phone line, Lily, which is incredibly regrettable in the circumstances. But you had no choice but to go along with his wishes, even though, particularly you coming on after Sue, who stressed the meaning to her of being looked after and not being lonely, you felt that possibly his choices were not the ones you would have made for him had you been in charge.
I wouldn't, but I fought with him and I didn't let him think for 1 minute. He said to me, darling, I've never broken a promise to you. I'll beat this. I'll beat this. We can forget about it and live our lives. But I lost him at 56, and fit and healthy man who didn't really drink, didn't smoke, didn't do any of the things he shouldn't, and just loved us all. He was the most magnificent man you could ever meet, and life is hard without him.
I'm sure it is, and I won't patronise you with any platitudes. It just is. Sometimes you sit with the pain, you sit with the horror, and hope that it never goes away. But you already know all that, Lily. Thank you. It is quite a morning, isn't it, for recognising the humanity everywhere, and indeed the importance of kindness, as Carolyn says. Sue's call illustrates so clearly how important kindness is. To me, it's the most important thing in the world. I lost my beloved John to cancer. I think of that poor lady in Gaza who had just been diagnosed with cancer and had several children to look after and is living through hell. There's no kindness there. My heart breaks. Mark's in Sevenoaks. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hey, thanks for doing the subject. It's I've got personal experience and maybe throw some light in amongst the sort of shade and of all of this. I was diagnosed with cancer. I've been clear for 2 years, so I was diagnosed with a throat cancer, and I had a lump in my neck, and I was fit as a fiddle and working and just getting on. I've run my own businesses, so I'm always really busy. And I had a lump in my neck, no pain, nothing, just a lump. And my wife to be said to me, I don't like the lump in, what's that in your neck? And I'm like, I'm all right, I'm okay. And I flicked it, like being sort of a bit macho about it. Yeah. Look, no pain and everything. And then she said, look, promise me you'll go. So great, I went to Lewisham Hospital early one morning. A young doctor put a thing in my mouth and looked and stood back really quickly and said, yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. Because how often do we look in our own mouth and look? We don't, do we? Not that often. No. And he stood back and he said, I think you need to see a friend of mine. Right. And I said, well, what's up? And he said, I think maybe you've got a throat infection. I'm going to give you some antibiotics. Okay. But really, it was a play off. So he gave me this appointment with a specialist. And then luckily, my father-in-law was involved in the sort of medical world. And he said to me, who's your consultant that they want you to see? Google him. You could find him privately. And I was in his consultancy room in Blackheath the next morning. Gosh. So I sort of jumped for £250, and it was the best £250 I spent, because by the time I went for the biopsies and everything like that, that's all I ever paid out. Everything else went to National Health afterwards. Sure. I sort of fast-forwarded to the point where when they knew what was wrong with me, because what they do as well, this is for my personal thing.
We are going to run out of time, Mark. I know it's a bit brutal in the circumstances, but don't distract yourself, whatever you do.
No, sorry, they basically tell you what you haven't got.
Yeah.
And eventually when they got me in the room and said, look, it's not good news, it's cancerous.
Yeah.
I just sort of said, well, is it going to kill me? And they said, yeah, within 4 months if you don't do anything about it. So I was like, oh, well, I'm too busy to be dead.
Right.
So they said, well, look, we can put you on this. And I got onto a trial.
Wow.
And the trial was really successful. I had a robotic surgery. I was in 2 weeks before I was getting married. I got married still, didn't tell anybody. And then between my surgery and my radiotherapy, my wife got pregnant. We've now got a 17-month-old.
Well, it's all there, isn't it? So, I mean, that will give hope to some people who are dealing with some of the grimmer elements of this conversation and reflecting upon some of the previous callers. And I'm sorry I have to sort of cut you off before well, I suppose we did get to the end of the story, although I feel like I rushed you a bit, so I'll apologise for that instead. Mark, you take care of yourself. It is 11 o'clock. It's 3 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The last time they tried to put a plane in the air to send refugees to Rwanda, and remember, if you care about facts, it is perfectly plausible that these human beings are completely genuine refugees. The application will be processed in Rwanda, and if they are found to be fleeing persecution, famine or war, they will stay in Rwanda for the rest of their lives. That's the plan. That's the actual plan. Even conservative politicians were touring studios after it was first announced, claiming that if their applications were successful, they'd come back here. Ian Duncan Smith, who admittedly is not a man who many people would think of first when making a list of individuals likely to understand complicated issues. He was very much at the front of the queue of people who were pontificating publicly upon a policy that they had failed completely to understand. So I just, that's important. Listen, there are plenty of people out there who couldn't care less, whether they're genuine asylum seekers, genuine refugees, or not. They just want everybody out. And the more unpleasant and the more inhuman you can make their treatment on the way out, the better. And those, of course, are the people that the likes of Priti Patel and Suella Braverman and honest Bob Jenrick are currently fighting over. It's your support that they want. The more vicious you are in your contemplations of these people, the more desperate you are to hear the lies about how they're all awful and that one disgusting chemical attacker is somehow emblematic of an entire cohort of people, then the more delighted you must be now to have mainstream-ish politicians fighting for your support when once it was just old Nigel Farage that acknowledged your existence. So that's just facts, okay? That's not opinion. And so are these. The last time they tried to put one of these planes into the air, staff found custody officers taking one asylum seeker from his room at the Immigration Removal Centre found him self-harming on his bed. A report said he was bleeding after making cuts to his arm using parts of a drinks can. He wouldn't stop cutting himself until officers seized his arms. He was still being treated by a nurse as he was handed over to escorts tasked with transporting him to the plane, which was waiting at the Boscombe Down military base in Wiltshire. He was put under constant supervision as part of an official suicide prevention strategy. Another asylum seeker told staff he would kill himself if he was forced to get on the flight. He was put in a waist restraint belt and physically attached to a plane seat. He started thrashing around and shouting, "No, no." Then his head was held in place by custody staff who said they needed to ensure he did not headbutt either of the escorts or injure himself. So he's sort of being held, his head is being held rigidly. He continued to scream, said an official report. And at about 10:15 that night, the officials were informed that the flight had been cancelled. At that point, he immediately stopped shouting. There's an awful lot of reports that you may not be aware of. A third man told the interpreter he didn't want to go, dropped to the floor on his knees, very distressed, staff described him as. He started to scream and hit his head against the seat in front. One of the custody officers described restraining his wrists, arms and head, and when he started biting his tongue, they applied a mandibular angle pain technique to make him release it. The Home Office guidance states that such techniques should never be used when there is an alternative, but are, quotes, justifiable if that is the only viable and practical way of dealing with a violent incident which poses an immediate risk of physical harm. A fifth passenger was guided out of a detention centre after refusing to leave. He appeared as if he may throw up, holding his stomach and bending forward. And, there are more. These details were secured, I think, by a Freedom of Information request via various charities. And again, I do acknowledge the existence of people who don't care. I don't want you to think I don't know you're there. And I also acknowledge that possibly that should have had a trigger warning on it. But I don't know what's more harrowing. Those sort of stories about what we are doing to human beings, or the fact that the Prime Minister in charge of the policy can do this.
And I believe that when we get it up and running, when we get flights going off, and it's uncapped so we can send lots of people there, then people will stop coming. And you know why I know that that's going to work? It's because, as you acknowledged, it's worked with Albania.
If I said to you, I'll bet you £1,000 to a refugee charity, you don't get anybody on those planes before the election, will you take that bet?
Well, I want to get the people on the planes, right? Of course I want to get the people on the planes.
£1,000.
Right? I want to get the people on the planes. I'm working incredibly hard to get the people on the planes.
Do you think that should be the priority when at the same time the ONS just predicted we could hit 73 million people who in this country, right, coming in not on boats, but coming in the normal immigration system by 2036.
Hang on,
both people go, well, that seems massively more problematic to me.
People talk to me a lot about illegal migration, as I'm sure they talk to you about you. It's important that we grip it, and Rwanda is one part of an overall plan that is working.
So he took the bet. Prime Minister of the United Kingdom took the bet. They shook hands on it. If you haven't seen the footage, if you've spent most of the morning under a rock, I mean that affectionately. It's everywhere. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak already saying that he was taken by surprise when he agreed to make a £1,000 bet over his Rwanda policy. He's told one interviewer he was not a betting person, but at the same time denied that it was a mistake. It's an interview with another radio station in which he's claimed he was trying to convey his absolute commitment to the policy. The problem with this for me, well, the first thing to happen is that you notice how inured you are to horror. So quite a few people are suggesting I should have issued a trigger warning, particularly for detailing the account of self-harm in those Freedom of Information requests published in the newspaper. And you may well be right, in which case, of course, I apologise. But how can we be living in a country where descriptions of what happens to people on these planes should be accompanied by trigger warnings in case people listening to a radio programme find them too traumatic, a position with which I have 100% sympathy, when the man who is in charge not just of this policy but of ostensibly the entire country hasn't got the wherewithal to tell a publicity-seeking opportunist on a television programme that only exists because Rupert Murdoch is bankrolling epic losses to stick his disgusting stunt where the sun don't shine. I mean, if he needs advice from me, which I would ordinarily consider unlikely, but in this occasion he clearly needs advice from someone, you say, please, Piers. That was Piers Morgan doing the interview. Please, Piers, don't try to make if you like, capital, televisual capital, or please don't try to turn this very important issue into a crass attempt at seeking attention or attracting views. What was that about? He's not a betting man, he says. He worked for a bloody hedge fund. What do you think a hedge fund is? Oh, I'm not a betting man, unless it's billions of pounds. I'm betting upon the economic consequences of Brexit or the international financial crisis being bad for the country that I seek to govern. I'll make a ton of money out of that. I'll make a ton of money out of betting upon the misery of the voters that I'm going to be wooing in 10 years' time. But, oh no, I'm not a betting man. Here I am shaking hands with probably the most accomplished self-publicist in the British media, who's offered me a £1,000 bet on whether or not a plane full of people self-harming is actually going to take off before the next general election, and I've bitten his arm off. But I'm not a betting man. Oh no, I'm Rishi Sunak. I made all my money betting on the markets, but I'm not a betting man. There's a level of contempt for the voter, for the public, that very few politicians reach. because they're normally clever enough to cover it up. Sunak can't help himself. It's very strange. What was that? What was that? Why did Rishi Sunak take that bet? 0345 6060 973. Because he's an idiot? Because he's callous? Because he's so eager to please that he would not have the guts to say, put your hand back in your pocket, you ridiculous human being. I'm not placing bets upon the fate of human beings. Because he's so boiled by the bigotry of the policy that he's brought in that he's forgotten which way is right and which way is wrong, which way is up and which way is down. Because he doesn't think that refugees are human beings at all. They're just chips. You know what it made me think of? It made me think of Trading Places. I don't know if you've ever seen that film. One of my all-time favourite films, which reminds me, actually, I must watch it with the children. I don't think they've seen it. It's when Eddie Murphy was in his pomp. That opening scene when he's pretending to be a disabled military veteran in the park and the two cops pick him up. He's pretending to have had both of his legs amputated and the two cops pick him up and his legs obviously fall. But hallelujah, I can walk, hallelujah. It's an amazing film. But the plot pivot is two very, very wealthy city types who no doubt would tell their friends and perhaps even the BBC that they're not betting men. They place a $1, I'll say that again, a $1 bet on whether or not they can swap Eddie Murphy's character, a sort of recidivist criminal, with Dan Aykroyd's character, a very waspy son of privilege who works for their firm, their investment firm. Could they swap them round and prove that nurture is more important than nature, because Eddie Murphy's character would become a hotshot city trader and Dan Aykroyd's character, if he were to have misfortune lumped upon him from outside, would end up on his uppers in the way that Eddie Murphy is at the beginning of the film. And they place a bet on it. Two human beings who are so worthless in the eyes of these city gents. They're so worthless in the eyes of these plutocrats that they see them as mere playthings in a game that isn't even worthy of a stake of more than £1. It's £1,000 in this case for two very wealthy men. In Rishi Sunak's case, almost absurdly wealthy. Placing a bet, shaking the hand. 11:15 is the time. The lie that he's not a betting man, we can leave perhaps to Keir Starmer at PMQs tomorrow. I don't know, I've got a smear Keir for you later as well, which popped up a little later in the interview when Rishi Sunak, here's something I never thought I'd say, Rishi Sunak tries to do to Keir Starmer what Nadine Dorries once tried to do to me. I'll share that with you shortly. But here is the question. There's two questions, isn't there? There's always two questions. The first is, why did he take that bet? Analyse him, all you want, okay? Why did he take that bet? 0345 6060 973. There's no mystery about why Piers Morgan offered it. Cynical, attention-seeking publicity stunt. Why did he do the interview in the first place? Well, probably to keep Rupert Murdoch happy, which is not unique by any stretch of the imagination to Rishi Sunak or even to Conservative politicians. But why did he take that bet? 0345 6060 973. And the second question is, I had to remind myself how awful this is. I think we've become so inured now to things that would have been traffic stopping in 2015, say, when Ed Miliband, we were all being urged not to vote for Ed Miliband because there'd be total chaos. Do you remember when David Cameron urged us to do that? I mean, it's not even that long ago. It was 2019, I think, when Amber Rudd resigned over mistakes that hadn't even been made on her watch. She'd accidentally misled Parliament of a consequence of paperwork she'd been given in her department. She resigned on a point of honour. A few months later, she resigned again because she couldn't go along with Boris Johnson's lies. That's only 4-5 years ago, when a senior Conservative politician could resign on a point of principle twice in the same cycle. And now you've got a Prime Minister not having the wherewithal, because he's so boxed in by this disgusting policy that he must know in his heart is disgusting and probably doomed. But because of the people to the right of him insisting that we've got to be even nastier to refugees, there he is, not having the wherewithal to say, no, listen, I'm here to answer your questions. There's a little bit of me that doesn't even want to talk about it because we're delivering the attention to the other character that he so desperately craves. But you have to talk about it, and this is what I had to remind myself of when it is the Prime Minister. When it is the Prime Minister. 0345 6060973. Why did he take the bet? And what do you make of it? Seriously, I don't like asking this question because you normally need a little bit more direction or guidance from me. The vaguer I am, the harder it can sometimes be. But on this one, take a moment, talk me through your response to this. Tell me it's not as bad as I think it is, please, because I don't want it to be. It seems to me to be disgusting. It seems to me to be Roman. It seems to me to smack of Hunger Games type pathology. Ordinary human beings, desperate human beings, being treated like mere chips to the plutocrats, to the Prime Minister, to very wealthy men placing bets upon the fate of desperate human beings. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. 21 minutes after 11 is the time. I think I may have something for you in a moment. I think we may have unearthed some footage of Rishi Sunak explaining how much he likes betting in a different context. This morning, if you're just tuning in, he placed a £1,000 bet or last night on the fate of refugees. And when confronted with the crassness of this decision, he claimed that A, he'd been taken by surprise, and B, he wasn't actually a betting man. So how embarrassing will it be for Rishi Sunak if we play in the next few minutes footage of him talking enthusiastically about how much he enjoys betting? That's if it does exist. See what I'm doing? I'm building some tension. 22 minutes after 11 is the time. Mark says, I think it's simple, James. He did it because he wants to be popular and tough, but he's ended up displaying that he's just a really bad politician. Really bad. What sort of a Prime Minister could do that? What sort of statesman? I think not. It was disgusting. James, he pauses and struggles to answer as he's trying to work through in his mind what his target audience of Telegraph and Express and Mail readers would want him to say. He knows what he should say, but is so distracted by thoughts of that audience that he becomes discombobulated and confused. So he takes the bet because he thinks he must sound absolutely sure on the policy. That's from Hugh. I quite like that. There's a trigger warning here. I'm warning you. I'm about to describe something hideous. Justine has been in touch. My daughter is a care worker who attends a refugee in a hotel. His hands have been hacked off. He loves Britain and has a massive union flag on his wall. I, meanwhile, feel ashamed of this government. Rishi Sunak, of course, placing bets upon sending that man to Rwanda. Sunak, says Paul in Coventry, is an avaricious, cruel and facile man. And this has lethal consequences. He has no soul. I don't know that that's fair. I think I would actually be more generous and say it almost had the look of a little boy trying to be in with a big boy. And the idea that a Rupert Murdoch presenter can be the big boy and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom a little boy is sadly very much of a piece with what our country has become in recent years. Archie's in Leicester. Archie, what would you like to say? No, Mary's in Portsmouth. Mary, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. How are you?
Very well, Mary. What's on your mind? What's he up to? Why did he take the bet?
Well, he's a gambler. That's obviously, and I haven't seen the footage, but I have seen on Twitter that apparently there is footage about him bragging about the hedge funds, is it, that he used to be.
Well, that is his previous job, but I'm interested in what you think's going on in his mind. If you offered me a £1,000 bet on whether or not planes are going to take off to Rwanda, I can just about imagine circumstances in which I might take it if I wasn't Prime Minister, but if I was Prime Minister, I'd tell you to sling your hook immediately.
Well, the Prime Minister, as Prime Minister, he can help that. He can make that happen. So he can make it so that he wins the bet anyway.
Yes. Okay. 24 after 11 is the time, Mary. I've got that clip, so I'm going to crack on immediately with that. Here he is earlier today telling us that he's not a betting man.
Now, yesterday, you shook hands on a £1,000 bet with Piers Morgan over the Rwanda scheme. When people are struggling to pay their food and and fuel bills in this country. A lot of our listeners are saying they found that pretty offensive.
Well, if I'm being totally honest, I'm not a betting person, and I was taken totally by surprise in the middle of that interview. And the point I was trying to get
was
across...
it a mistake to shake his hand?
Well, the point I was trying to get across, I said I was taken totally by surprise.
Well, the point I was trying to get across, as I said, I was taken totally by surprise. I'm not a betting man. And I was taken totally by surprise. And the point I'm trying to get across is that I'm not a betting man, and I was taken totally by surprise.
I also, which was quite dangerous, discovered this. I think it was around that time that spread betting had become a thing online.
Yep.
I had certainly never done it before, but then so I was sitting there working on one side doing my investing finance job, and on the other screen, it's quite helpful in those jobs, you have multiple screens. On the other screen, I was doing next wicket partnership, next wicket for innings total. I just discovered this thing, and it was great. So I had the summer doing that as well.
Yes.
I think we need to do that again, don't we? This is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom defending himself against accusations that he should never in a million years have accepted a bet from a self-promoting television presenter upon the fate of refugees who he is determined to deport to a country where the regime still routinely imprisons and tortures enemies of the state. So, Rishi Sunak, why the hell did you do it?
Now, yesterday, you shook hands on a £1,000 bet with Piers Morgan over the Rwanda scheme. When people are struggling to pay their food and fuel bills in this country, a lot of our listeners are saying they found that pretty offensive.
Well, if I'm being totally honest, I'm not a betting person, and I was taken totally by surprise in the middle of that interview. And the point I was trying to get across...
Was it a mistake to shake his hand?
Well, the point I was trying to get across, I said I was taken totally by surprise.
An interview with our friends at BBC 5 Live, and this interview from a while ago on the Test Match special.
I also, which was quite dangerous, discovered this. I think it was around that time that spread betting had become a thing online.
Yep.
I had certainly never done it before, but then so I was sitting there working on one side doing my investing finance job, and on the other screen, it's quite helpful in those jobs, you have multiple screens. On the other screen, I was doing next wicket partnership, next wicket for innings total. I just discovered this thing, and it was great. So I had the summer doing that as well.
Yes.
Ambushed by a bet, I suppose, as one unsigned text has pointed out. Is it an improvement or a decline from managing to be ambushed by a cake? So Rishi Sunak is lying to you today. He's lying to you in the starkest of terms. He has previously, in an attempt, and this I think is part of the answer to the question of why he took the bet, in an attempt to curry favour with the people who were interviewing him on one occasion, he has claimed, or he has revealed, his enthusiasm for betting. Leaving aside for the moment the fact that his entire professional success is built upon a form of betting, he wanted that interviewer at the cricket to like him, so he talked about betting, because that's what these chaps like. And then, when confronted with the crassness of his own conduct yesterday, he claimed to another interviewer, and the crassness was a consequence of him wanting to be liked by the other interviewer, not having the wherewithal to say, don't be so disgusting, put your money away, or put your hands back in your pockets. He told another interviewer that he didn't like betting at all. So we can say categorically and without fear of any legal action that Rishi Sunak has been lying through his teeth in the last few hours. But I still don't know why he took that bet. Why did he shake Piers Morgan's hand? Something which you'd think twice about in any circumstances, let alone in a television studio in the circumstances of that wager. Archie's in Leicester. Archie, what would you like to say?
Hello. I'd like to say I don't think the bet's as bad as it's being portrayed by the media. I think that his bet is just to ensure confidence in the British public that he will execute the Rwanda plan and send illegal immigrants there.
Why didn't he just say that then and say, I don't want to reduce it to something as crass as a bet?
Well, I think if he refused it, then the media would paint it as if that he was like a chicken and he wouldn't agree on the bet.
No,
because
they wouldn't. They wouldn't.
Okay.
Well, I mean, they just wouldn't, because no one's going to say he should have done that really crass.
No, I'm not saying that they would have said he would have done it, but they've said it hasn't installed a huge amount of confidence, just completely refusing the question. And also, I'd say the Rwanda plan, at its core, is it's effective if it's implemented in the correct way and in the correct place.
Do you know? Actually, I can disprove you on this. The Nick Ferrari offered him a bet. I didn't know this. Someone's just sent me the story. Offered him exactly the same bet in August a couple of years ago, but it was only £100 bet. I guess Nick and Piers Morgan are on different wages. But he was running in the leadership hustings, and he said, "No, I'm not taking that. What we need to do is make the plan work." And you didn't know that, so it's not as if the media went nuts about his refusal to do it.
No, but I think Piers Morgan's a lot more of a famous person compared to him, and this interview is.
No, Nick's got way more listeners than Piers Morgan has viewers.
Yeah, but Piers Morgan's been.
And this was at the leadership hustings. Awareness. This was the leadership hustings televised everywhere on proper television stations.
But I just feel like when
you can't carry on, Archie. You can't keep talking, can you? Because every single thing you've said has fallen apart now. So it happened on a bigger platform. It happened in public, and the former Chancellor, as he was described then, had the wherewithal to say, "No, I'm not taking that bet. There are more important things to focus on." So every single thing you said is wrong.
Okay, well, that's what you think.
No. Tell me why I'm wrong. Tell me why that's not what's just happened.
That might have happened, but I didn't know that had happened.
Which means you're even wrong when you say that if he'd turned it down, the media would have given him a really hard time about it, because he did turn it down on a much bigger platform and the media didn't give him a hard time. So you're wrong about that as well, aren't you?
Yeah, probably. But I just didn't know. That was what I thought would happen.
But that's what proves you're wrong.
Yeah.
What else you got on today? See you, Archie. It's 11:31. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines. If you work as a hedge fund manager, says Paul, the job is about gambling. So maybe that explains why he doesn't have a clue about what his job description is as Prime Minister, suggests Paul. This explains a lot. Why did he do it? It's just so bizarre. And it's an insight into what you think of Rishi Sunak. That's what I'm looking for. The decision to take the bet, not least because when Nick Ferrari, and I stand by my description of it being a very crass publicity-seeking tactic for an interviewer to deploy, secure in the knowledge that Nick's perfectly capable of taking that on the chin. Why didn't he just say, like he did to Nick a couple of years ago when he played exactly the same card, why didn't he just say, put your silly offer away, this is a serious subject? Why did he take the bet? Luke's in Nottingham. Luke, what would you like to say?
Afternoon, mate. How are you doing?
Very well.
It's just really kind of reiterating what you said. I mean, first of all, anything that makes light of this is pretty abhorrent, really. It's kind of, it really are, like you said earlier with the trading places analogy, it really is kind of like making bets on people's lives, whether he kind of fully understood what he was doing or not.
Why would a bet make any difference to anything? Is the idea that if he says no, it means he doesn't really believe that it is going to happen? Well, but he's worth £600 or £700 million. So the idea that he's going to have to end up making I don't understand it at all, actually.
So this is what I kind of came to my head when I was thinking about this. There used to be a character on the Fast Show called Indecisive Dave.
Oh yeah,
and he was like the.
I think more phone-ins should reference the Fast Show. Go on.
It was Paul Whitehouse, the character, and he was the guy in the pub that always kind of, he was sat there with his pint of lager, and he was, whoever had the strongest opinion in that conversation, he was kind of, he hooked onto it. He was all about it, banging on about it, and then it could have been football, it could have been immigration, but as soon as somebody challenged it, he was like, "Oh yeah, well, but that's right, yeah, absolutely, no, you're absolutely right."
I remember that. That's what he's done.
I think it is. He's literally flip-flopping from one day to another. Someone's told him something he thinks is a good idea, so he runs with it. He's got no spine to. We all know he doesn't want the Rwanda scheme. He couldn't do anything about Suella, so he's harping on her kind of music sheet, singing along to his sheet.
Yes,
it is. But now he's like he's got no one around him. He's in the middle of an interview, and someone says, "I'll bet you can't do this," and he's like, "Oh, I'll have a bit of that." Yeah,
well, it wasn't. He didn't. No, it wasn't. It was because he didn't really want to, but he didn't have the wherewithal to say no.
Yeah.
I don't think.
It's just literally flip-flopping from opinions because nobody's telling him what he can say anymore. He's got too many people shouting in his ears, and he doesn't know his left from his right anymore, like you said earlier. That's it, simple as that.
Yeah, I'm going to find a little clip of Indecisive Dave for people not familiar with his oeuvre. But the idea that if you don't stand, what's that line from Hamilton? If you don't stand for anything, if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. And he doesn't like the Rwanda policy because he said so when he was Chancellor. You know that he's sort of handcuffed to it and he can't get away from it. And you know that there's a sort of craven element to his nature when he kind of wants to be in with whatever room he's in. He's ingratiating, which is odd, really, because he oscillates between contemptuous and ingratiating, depending on who he's with. Stick him in a room full of NHS patients and he's quite contemptuous. Stick him in a room full of plutocrats or powerful media figures or test match special interviewers and he's desperate for them to like him. So he'll tell them that he doesn't like betting and then he'll tell them that he loves it and he's been doing it all his life. Thank you, Luke. I like your insights. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Why did he take the bet? And the question becomes more interesting now that we know, and my apologies for missing it at the time, that Nick Ferrari offered him a bet on exactly the same grim premises a couple of years ago. So why would he not take it this time? Rather, why would he take it this time when he didn't take it that time? Marcus is in Greenwich. Marcus, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi there, James. First-time caller. Thanks very much for having me on.
You're very welcome.
I mean, with these two, Piers and Rishi, I think you could quite easily say that you can take the boys out of the city, but you can't take the city out of the boys, can you?
Maybe.
I mean, I've been in that environment. I've seen these people, and the more that they are ingrained in that type of world, the more tone deaf they become. And I think Rishi is just getting more and more tone deaf as we get close to the election. It's a shame that no one's asked him, do you want to bet £1,000 whether you'll be Prime Minister this time next year? I'm sure he wouldn't take that one, that's for sure. But,
he would have to, wouldn't he? But the bit I don't understand is the bit where he didn't just go, look, this is absolutely, it's far too serious for silly bets. I'm 100% committed to it, and I don't want to. I don't want to dilute the seriousness of the situation or indulge in any crass sort of publicity stunt. I mean, he could have come out of it looking strong, I think. Maybe I'm a bad reader of politics, but I think he could have come out of it looking strong.
Well, James, I don't think people sort of realise how much coaching he actually needs. Yeah. And when he's put on the spot, he just immediately falls back into what he knows and in the environment which he's grown. Remember, he doesn't really have lower class friends, does he?
Well, that's so from when he was. Sure. In his defence, he was 18 when he said that on tape for a television documentary. I think it is unlikely, in your defence, that he's developed a rich and fulfilling circle of working class friends since. But that applies to an awful lot of people from his kind of background. It's more that he doesn't seem. I don't know who his tribe is. Do you know what I mean? I don't know who who he speaks for ideologically. What is the brand of conservatism that he represents, apart from wealth fetishization and a kind of weirdly insubstantive support for Brexit. I don't know who he's speaking to. And when he tries to speak to the Braverman Patel generic people, he ends up getting into this sort of bother because he doesn't really mean it. What would Suella Braverman have done if she was offered that bet? She'd have doubled it.
I'll get a bit sick if I think about that.
Well, James, I can only apologise, but she'd have doubled. She said, "I bet you £10,000." I bet she'd have done something like that. She'd have been even worse. But I don't know why he has been so. What's the word I want? Even it's beyond mealy-mouthed. Mealy-mouthed fits his behaviour when he indulges in a little bit of light smear Keir later in the interview, which we'll have a look at shortly. But before that, looking at actually, should we have a little listen to Indecisive Dave? In case you don't. So is this... politicians as fast show characters, we could almost get a whole show out of, couldn't we? We could almost get a whole show out of that. So who would be Swiss Tony as David Davis? Didn't Charlie Hickson do that for us back in the day? Were you working on the show then, Keith? Didn't Charlie Hickson do David Davis as Swiss Tony for us? If you're not familiar with the files, can we dig that out as well while we're at it? I'm having a bit of fun with this today. If you're not familiar with the Fast Show, you really should be. And I've got a feeling it's coming back. I think I've read that they're getting the band back together. But it was one of the finest sketch programmes ever broadcast on television. And the idea that every character... Someone did an amazing pastiche of Farage and... What's the other fella called who is supposed to be running the party at the moment? The one that accosted me. Richard Tice. Someone's done a brilliant one of them as the aristocrat and the gamekeeper. Have you seen that photograph? It's on my Twitter account. So you can actually... Oh, this is a good game. British politicians as fast show characters. And the suggestion earlier was that Rishi Sunak is Indecisive Dave.
I'll tell you what, crime's got out of control, isn't it? Eh? What we need around here is a bit of that Islamic justice, isn't it? You know what I mean? You step out of line there, they'll chop your hands off, wallop.
What, maim someone for nicking sweets or something? Talk silly, Dave.
Yeah, what they like, eh? Barbaric, isn't it? Ain't chopping a little kiddie's hand off just for nicking a Mars bar or something.
Don't chop kiddies' hands off, Dave. Only grown men who should know better.
Yeah, and that's how it should be, yeah. Yeah, we can learn a lot from them, couldn't we?
Yeah, but I still wouldn't want to live there, Dave.
Now imagine that, eh? Nightmare! They'd bang you up for having a beer in some of them places, wouldn't they? No, you've got to cherish your freedom, haven't you?
Yeah, but you can't have crimos running about the street willy-nilly, can you?
No, it's got to be the boot camp.
Yeah, but they've already tried that, haven't they?
Yeah, what, short, sharp, shock? Whose bleeding bright idea was that, eh? I mean, it's just so obvious, isn't it? You've got to re-educate criminals. You treat a bloke like an animal, he's going to behave like an animal.
Yeah, so what you're saying is send them off on lovely holidays at the taxpayer's expense?
No, we should hang them. So you bring back hanging, you see some changes around here, wouldn't you?
Yeah, right, so you hang a bloke and then later you find out he's innocent. What then?
You spotted it, haven't you? Central flaw in the old hanger my mob's argument. Yeah, there's no chance of appeal, is there?
Yeah, but it's a very powerful deterrent to the death penalty.
Exactly.
Like in America?
Exactly.
Where they got the death penalty?
Exactly.
And the highest murder rate in the world?
Exactly, it don't work, does it?
So, David, in a nutshell, what is your solution to the problem of crime in society?
Well... it's not easy, is it?
Just bang on the money. 45 minutes. I think I didn't dream Charlie Higson actually doing the character, the actor, the brilliant comedian and actor and writer who did the Fast Show. I didn't dream him doing David Davis for us during the Brexit shenanigans, did I? That would be a bit weird if it didn't happen. I'm absolutely certain in my brain that it did. It's 11:45. More on why on earth Rishi Sunak took this bet and his lies about being a betting man. But also a little question for you. You've heard in the news that Kwasi Kwarteng is stepping down as an MP while Liz Truss has launched a new organisation because there aren't enough hard right factions in the Tory party all biting chunks out of each other on a regular basis. From the 2019 general election, the one where Boris Johnson promised to get Brexit done and all of that malarkey with his oven-ready deal. How many Conservative MPs elected in 2019 do you think have already revealed that they will not be? I'll give you a clue. 4 of them are no longer Conservative MPs. They've become independents for various reasons. But of all of the Conservative MPs elected in 2019, how many do you think we already know will not be fighting the general election this year? They will not be standing in this year's general election. Kwasi Kwarteng has become the latest name on that list. But how long is the list? I'll tell you after this. 10 to 12, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I knew I hadn't dreamt it. Charlie Higson, bless him, really did do I can't even remember making that call. Hello, mate. We've never met. But you know one of your most famous creations. Would you mind resurrecting him to help me with a joke that I'm making about Brexit negotiator David Davis? And he did. I'll remind you of that shortly. But in the meantime, there is a game here, isn't there? British politicians as Fast Show characters. But that's not for today. Today's question is, why on earth did Rishi Sunak take this bet? What's wrong with the man? What is wrong with the man? Dave's in Doncaster. Dave, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, Dave.
It's a tough one because
it is, isn't it?
I honestly, with every fibre of my being, believe that he is not betting with people's lives because he cannot comprehend other people's lives. We are numbers on a screen with statistics in a document. He is literally betting with poker chips.
Yeah.
We're not real people to him, to any Tory minister, frankly. Can you think of a single prominent Tory minister of the last, let's say, since Cameron, who genuinely gave you the impression that they had an ounce of empathy?
Yeah, I can. Since 2010?
Since Cameron left, let's say.
Since he left. You've just moved the goalposts as I was about to slot one home then.
Go on and tell me.
Well, I mean, before that, you've got people like Rory Stewart, you've got people like Anna Soubry, you've got people like David Gauke, Dominic Grieve. They all held office under David Cameron. But since Cameron left, Tom Tugendhat looked like a good egg for a while.
For a while.
Tobias Ellwood.
To me, the whole problem comes from their total disconnection with reality.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, you were making the Thatch Show comparison, which I agree with, to be honest. And the irony of me coming on as a caller straight after you play the clip of...
being called Dave.
Yeah.
Indecisive Dave. Well, you're not indecisive, are you? That much is clear. Yes.
Well, my opinion is not a new one on... the political elite, and I don't think I'm on my own there. But then again, I'm part of the self-proclaimed downtrodden working class. I suppose I'm as indoctrinated in that way as. But
he would claim that the working class are the big fans. They're the big cheerleader. I hate these generalisations. The problem with class is the general. It's true. But he would. He's got plenty of people in every demographic who are cheering for refugees to be treated abominably, but
this is very true. Yeah. But when he's making a bet, I don't think it's the refugees he's thinking of. Now let's look at the specific sum of money, for instance. £1,000 bet to a man, £1,000 to Rishi Sunak is. He could lose £1,000 down the back of the couch and he wouldn't even notice.
Yeah, that's true.
That could change people's lives.
Well, it's enough to tempt someone into working in a childcare nursery who wasn't previously. We talked about that at the end of last week, didn't we? That's the sweetener that's being offered to people who aren't currently keen to work in nurseries, but who they need to work in nurseries in order to make the latest Wizard Wheeze policy work.
Exactly.
Well, I don't know that it's right to get stuck up. The producer was confused earlier. Eleanor was saying earlier she doesn't understand why everyone's obsessing about the amount of money involved. That's not his fault. That's the sum that Morgan offered.
This is true, and I agree. My point being, even if that sum was £1, that would have been abhorrent. The
in trading places,
£1,000 kind of makes it taste worse. But their level of removal from everyday life for the people that they are elected to represent. You mentioned just a few moments back. You mentioned Liz Truss and her new breakaway group. Am I right in thinking that they've called themselves the Popular Conservatives?
I think you might be. I think Henry Riley is there at the moment, and will be catching up with us. So PopCons would be the phrase. What happened to the NatCons?
The level of irony that Liz Truss, of all people, will be heading up any group with the word popular in the title is just...
Well, you sounds like you are writing the extra chapter for my last book, current book, that I have to finish this weekend in time for the paperback publication, Dave, because I'm trying to update on all the 10 characters in it, and Liz Truss thinking that she's somehow due a second coming. A friend of mine was telling me at the weekend that she really is marching around places, including the Brit Awards, telling people that she is coming back and that she was right all along, and that everybody who has written her off is underestimating her. Dave, I tell you what, you've reminded me of something with that £1,000 figure. I don't know how significant it is, but the first figure I'll give you is 59, because I forgot to tell you, 59 Tory MPs elected in 2019 are not standing next time. These hooks and teases, I'm going to get the hang of it one day. 20 years into this job, still haven't got the hang of it. But I tell you something before the break, and then I give you the answer after the break. And the idea is that you don't then go anywhere during the break. You see? I hope I'm not giving away any trade secrets there. I'm very bad at it. 59 Tory MPs, 55 plus 4 who were Tory MPs but are now independent. People like Andrew Brigden. Henry Riley joining us shortly to bring us up to date with the latest faction to emerge from the Tory party. But I did have a principle a few years ago that Dave has reminded me of, and it was called the Urinal principle. And what it was the denomination of coin, or now it works with notes, because notes are plastic now, aren't they? They're waterproof. And it's the amount of money that you would leave in a urinal. You'd think, I'm not fishing that out. So if you dropped a 1p piece in a urinal, you would leave it there, right? Do ladies know what urinals are? You do. If you dropped to 10p, I mean, I'm not making light of poverty by any stretch of the imagination, but you could go up to £20 now, could you, with waterproof notes? Or the 50? I haven't seen a £50 note in years. But do you see what I mean? So what's the sum of money you could conceivably lose without noticing? And clearly for Rishi Sunak, it's a hell of a lot more than £1,000. There is something a little uncomfortable about that, I think, in the context of this bet. I'm quite relaxed about someone very rich being in charge of the country if they demonstrate empathy and understanding. You have that little side question bubbling away constantly about, well, why don't you give a bunch of money to the NHS? But that's just a bit naive, idealistic. But that one there, the question of how much could you lose without noticing, and that adds a level, as Dave suggests, a level of crassness to the bet. Lou's in Hampton Hill. Lou, why did he do it? What's he done it for? All it's done is bring more trouble to his door.
Hi, James.
Hello, Lou.
I've suddenly got a little bit nervous.
Suddenly me? What are you talking about?
Why did he do it? Every time I see Rishi Sunak being interviewed or talking to anyone, he just reminds me of a little excited puppy who's got to just, please like me, please, please like me. I'll say anything you want.
Yes.
Just like me.
Yes.
And it's embarrassing. And I think, I mean, Dave, really, your last caller, he said it all, really. I think they're just so far removed from the general public. But also for me, that whole thing of, taking a bet on, I mean, where's our compassion gone? These are human beings, that we're talking about.
It's a consequence of dehumanising, isn't it? The fact that people can talk in these terms about placing a bet on. So, as you place a bet on a football match, you don't place a bet on a deportation flight to a country where refugees have been shot dead in the last few years.
And I can't believe how many people believe that it is just a load of men that want to come over here and work. And I do think the media is responsible for some of these pictures they show, where it appears to be all men. And I've spoken to friends who've been helping in centres, and they say, it's just not true. There are women and babies coming over.
We're talking about immigration, Lou. The first thing you do is leave the facts at the door. And even if they are, they like to use the phrase.
James.
They like to use the phrase fighting age men. And if you're coming from Syria or Afghanistan, it's precisely because you're a fighting age man that you don't want to be sent into a war you've got no stake in as cannon fodder for some either extremists who are backed by Vladimir Putin or your own crazy President Assad or the Taliban. Listen, these people, they don't string the thoughts together. They just have things to shout about fighting age men, or I don't know. But anyway, we continue to do what we can to push back against such nonsenses. You are listening to James O'Brien. It is coming up to 12 noon on LBC. I'm always very disturbed by these tales of dogs killing humans, but the latest one has put thoughts in my mind that I haven't had before, and questions that I've never asked you. I will do after this. 4 minutes after 12 is the time. How much time have we spent together? How long have you been kind enough to indulge me on a vaguely regular basis? Do you do the same thing that I do? Do you find that sometimes there are issues which we are really, really interested in, and then almost suddenly, or for reasons that are quite hard to pin down, suddenly we're not? It's a weird one. I used to, I think partly because I used to get on my high horse about it so much, and if I haven't got a high horse to get on anymore, then it loses some of its sense of urgency. But I have been nowhere near as engaged in stories of people being killed by dogs as I used to be, and I don't know why. There was one recently, wasn't there, involving a little girl who I don't think was killed, but the footage was so harrowing that I found myself wanting to look away. I always do. I'm not built like that, I don't know why that is. If someone's a mate of mine is a bit of a ghoul when it comes to grisly footage that's available online of people accidentally getting hurt. I don't mean the stuff we've been reading about in the context of the Brianna Jai case. I've got no interest in seeing. I don't want to see stuff that's ghoulish or. I don't even like horror films, to be honest with you. But I just look away. My impulse is to look away. But there's something about the latest story of a 68-year-old woman being killed by 2 dogs that really resonated with me. And it was the testimony of her daughter, actually, Esther Martin's daughter, who described the lucky escape of her nephew from the dog attack which killed his grandmother. He ran into the street screaming for help, according to the victim's daughter. 39-year-old man was arrested by Essex police on suspicion of dangerous dogs offences and has been released on conditional bail until the 5th of March. It's important to bear that in mind when discussing the case. The 2 dogs have been destroyed. They were destroyed by officers at the scene. What struck me about this story was testimony from family members that they had been concerned about this for ages. And they had been expressing their concerns to their own family member for ages. And I haven't approached it from that angle before. I haven't thought of it from that angle before. There's a sort of laziness involved in some of this, isn't there? I have a bit of snobbery, I think, when it comes to dangerous dogs. I presume that the kind of scenario in which so-called XL bullies are being bred is a bit kind of a bit of an insalubrious environment, and that's really wrong. I mean, you know, it's not a class issue, is it? The dangerous dog crisis or the dangerous dog problem? I don't think it is, but that's where I have a little tendency towards that, which I need to check. Because what struck me about this story was so what I mean by that is I presume that everybody's part of it. So, you know, everybody in the circle, everybody in the family, everybody in the friendship group is as enthused by these killer dogs, these horrible dogs, as the owner is. What this story brought home was the fact that it could be your family member. It could be your neighbour who's got a dog that you think is a menace, that you think could kill somebody one day. And I'm fascinated by what that's like. I'm fascinated by what those conversations are like. We've touched on antisocial neighbours a bit lately. And do you know, every time we have a conversation about antisocial neighbours, someone always rings in who's living next door to a brothel. It's not the same person. I'm not suggesting it's the same person ringing in all the time. But we always hear from someone who's got a brothel upstairs or a brothel next door. And that's not one of the things you think of initially or immediately when you're talking about antisocial neighbours. I must have told you 100 times about sitting outside a house we were about to buy. Do you remember this? We were sitting outside a house we were about to buy. We were about to put an offer in it. And the windows flew open of the house next door. 2 apparent pit bulls, or whatever they were, jumped through the windows of the front, just a very small front garden on like a workman's cottage type building. Although they go for about £2 million now in that part of London. But this is going back a long time. Two vicious-looking dogs jump out of the front window of the house next door to the one we were about to buy, defecate in the garden and jump back in again. I mean, on the one hand, they were incredibly well-trained. On the other, I don't want to live next door to that. And so literally, about to press dial on the phone to ring the estate agent and put an offer in, and that was it. We were out. So in fact, the idea of living next door to a dog like this would be enough to put you off a house purchase, or indeed to make you want to move. I want to know what that's like. So have you got a family member or a neighbour or a friend who insists that their dog is safe when you are terrified or deeply concerned that their dog is actually a potential killer? 0345 6060 973. How do you navigate that? How do you negotiate that? I'm trying to think what I'd do. I mean, it's not a situation I've ever found myself in, although a friend's dog did once go for one of my children, and we were profoundly upset by their lack of contrition or concern. It was, oh, that's what he's like. And you're just like, well, you should have, but A, should have been muzzled, and B, you should have bloody told us that before we even came into your house. But it wasn't a serious attack, and it wasn't a dog that one would ordinarily associate with serious attacks. So I'm just thinking what it's like if it's your brother, as I think it is in this case. Your brother's got dogs that you don't want to go near, and you certainly don't want to let your children go near, but your mum wants to go around to see her grandchildren. And you want to say to mum, don't go. Look, he's got 8 of them now. He's got 6 puppies. He's got two XL bullies, as they're called, and 6 puppies in the house. And there's a reason why you're not allowed to breed them anymore. The Dangerous Dogs Act seems a little bit of a mess, doesn't it? It's illegal to sell or breed the dogs, and you can only keep them if you've registered them for an exemption, and they have to be muzzled and kept on a leash in public. But who's actually enforcing that? Who's going to enforce that when the police can't even catch shoplifters? Going to go after a bloke who's not got his dog on a lead. Yeah. And this is not a criticism of the police, not in a million years. Goodness knows. It's like everything else, whether it's the asylum system or the NHS or the dentists. This is now we're seeing. They're going to be out at the next election probably, and the full grisly consequences of the austerity they've been inflicting on the country for the last 14 years are only going to be appreciated when someone else is in charge, probably Keir Starmer. And his job will be to undo it while the Tory media turn around and start trying to attack him for all of the problems that he's inherited. It's going to be an extraordinary period of British politics moving forward because the full extent of what austerity has done to the country is still not understood. I had 2 stories today, just off the top of my head, that you might not be aware of. British infants are more likely to die before their first birthday than those in most other developed countries after an appalling decline in children's health. And guess where that decline in children's health tracks back to? And then an extraordinary picture of a queue outside a dentist's surgery in Bristol that actually got so long and so unruly that the police had to be called. Police were called to manage hundreds of people lined up outside a dentist's in Bristol who had flocked to the newly opened practice, desperate to secure an NHS appointment. You'd need a drone to get a picture of that queue in full. Speaking of which, I must tell you about what Led by Donkeys did on Bournemouth Beach yesterday. Remind me of that before I go home. So the idea that the police are going to be able to enforce dangerous dog legislation is palpably absurd, which means you have to deal with the family member or the friend or the neighbour who's got a dog that you don't think should be, and you can suspect or even know perhaps that this is a dog that is on the prescribed list, let alone one that you think should be. Your mum wants to go round to see her grandchildren. Your brother's got devil dogs. What do you do? What do you say? What's it like? And what's the defence? I don't mean the people that ring me up. We've done that a million times. I kind of mean the people who don't ring me. What do they say to you? What does your own dad say to you when you say, I'm not bringing your grandson around, Dad, until you get rid of that dog? And your dad says, all right, then, well, give him my love. But the dog's going nowhere. That's the tension that has been brought home to me by this horrible story. That idea of the family being at loggerheads, not being, as I don't know if I'm being unfair on myself when I say I did it in a snobbish fashion. I just presumed that the whole family would be on the same page with regard to the dangerous dog, whereas what this case has brought home in horribly clear fashion is that the family can be as discomforted and as uncomfortable with the devil dog as a complete stranger would be if it came up to them in the park. So how do you deal with that? What's that like? First question really is that happening to you? And I'll start taking those calls shortly. The number you need, 03. It's quite hard to get through to. Do you know, again, the easiest hour to get through was the politics hour. I'm getting a little bit worried about this. Your appetite for talking about politics seems to me to be diminishing as we approach a general election. Of course, it could be me losing my touch, but let's not be silly. But the number you need, anyway, if you want to talk about this, is 03456060973. A lot of you are claiming, I went to the bathroom during the last news bulletin. I do apologise. But a lot of you are telling me that Jacob Rees-Mogg just criticised other people, politicians in power, for spouting pompous platitudes. And I know that we're talking about an event at which Liz Truss will somehow claim that she is the answer to the country's problems. I'll say that again. Henry Riley is currently attending an event where Liz Truss is claiming that she is the answer to the country's problems. And it's at that event that Jacob Rees-Mogg is speaking. So clearly reality had to be checked in at the door if you wanted to go in. But for someone who was in the cabinet 10 minutes ago and is probably the most pompous politician that the country has ever seen, to be standing up and criticising other politicians in power for being pompous, I'm afraid I don't believe you. I think you must have misheard. Seriously, not even Jacob Rees-Mogg can be that devoid of self-awareness and good sense that he would stand up in public and criticise others for being pompous fools. It's 12:15. Highest platitudes of pompous politicians out of the mouth of Jacob Rees-Mogg. I think we've crossed another Rubicon of madness. I'm just trying to clarify whether that actually happened or not, or whether you all had a sort of collective fever dream. But in the meantime, we've talked about dangerous dogs a lot, but we've never talked about what if they bring conflict into a family, which seems to be the case in the tragic example of Esther Martin, killed by 2 dogs near Clacton-on-Sea, and her own grandson, who she was visiting, ran screaming for help into the street. The boy's aunt has expressed previously deep concern about these dogs, and it is to her, or from her, that this question comes, really. What's it like if the dog is in the family and you hate it? Nicola's in Wallingham. Nicola, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
My mum she inherited a cross between a staff and a bull terrier, I guess.
Who from?
Years ago, and we had.
Who did she inherit
3
it
very young. My aunt. She split up with her husband. It was his dog.
Right.
And she couldn't keep it because she had to move house. So my mum took it on, and I absolutely hated it. It was a huge, horrible, powerful dog. Anyway, we had very, very young children at the time.
Right.
And whenever we went round, I was absolutely terrified of the dog and asked her. So she used to put it behind a gate.
Did she like it? Did she like it, Nicola, or was she sort of doing it out of a sense of duty?
I think she did like it because we would say, we don't like the dog, and she would say, oh, he's fine. She kept the dog, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's why I'm interested in this, because in a way that's you'd say to her, we really don't like this dog, I don't really want to bring the kids round, and you'd expect your mum to go, all right, and it's not even my dog, I inherited it off your auntie's boyfriend, I'll take it to Battersea or something like that. But you'd have thought, and I don't want to malign your mum because she's not here, and also because you won't like me much if I do, but I'd have prioritised my grandchildren over someone else's dog, I think. Well, in the end she did, but it took a long time. So eventually we refused to go to her house, which I think was obviously the turning point.
Yes.
It did still take quite a long time before I think either my husband or my brother eventually took the dog to Battersea Dogs Home.
Right.
That was after it had sort of knocked her over, like ran into her and knocked her flying a few times, and she was always covered in bruises.
That's incredible, isn't it?
And the dog was eventually put down from because he was assessed and deemed as unsafe to be around.
So would you just sit there now and you wonder, don't you? What would have happened?
Yeah.
What could have happened?
Well, exactly. And it does terrify me that we used to go there and our babies were there, and I can't believe I went there, to be honest. I wish I'd never been, and obviously we were very lucky. But
you love your mum, and this poor lady, the idea of having to choose between not seeing her grandson, perhaps as often as she'd like, or maybe even at all, or running the gauntlet of these bloody dogs. I hate it. And that's exactly it. That's precisely the kind of experience I was thinking about, Nicola. Thank you. I'm glad you were listening today. And I'm glad that your story, I don't really want stories that haven't got a happy ending today. That's that idea of a lucky escape or having to put pressure on your family member. Do you think it was because you told your mum that you weren't coming around anymore that she finally took the decision to get rid of the dog?
I think so, but we were made to feel pretty guilty about it. But she did do it in the end, and it obviously was the right decision. But it was hard. It did cause a lot of problems in the family, and we are a very close family. But that dog was problematic.
I could hear it in your voice then. That dog, and why not? I mean, trying to imagine what I'd do. It's highly unlikely my brother-in-law would ever avail himself of an XL bully. But if he did, I don't think we'd go round. I just don't think we would. But what a huge breach that would be in a family. Thank you, Nicola. 23 after 12 is the time. Louise is in Chelmsford. Louise, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I'm about to burst your bubble on the happy ending, I'm afraid.
Well, I kind of knew that was going to happen, but I'm one of nature's optimists. What happened, Louise?
I had a German Shepherd and I still have a Golden Doodle. We had a neighbour who lives on the back of our house, and our garden backs off quite a few gardens, quite a large garden.
Right.
And we'd had ongoing issues with this neighbour's dog coming up to the fence and barking and barking and barking. We'd asked them to, can you get control of your dog? Can you stop him from coming to the fence barking? Because it made our German Shepherd go up and bark. Anyway, it came to a head 2 weeks ago. There was barking going on. We were bringing our German Shepherd away from the fence, bringing him back to the house. The neighbour's dog then jumped over our fence, which is 6 foot, and mauled my dog in our garden.
Oh, God.
And attacked me as well. I spent most of last week in hospital. Not a severe, my fingers are damaged and I've had to have 2 surgeries on my finger.
Oh.
But my dog then died a couple of days later.
A German Shepherd?
My dog was a German Shepherd, yeah.
So the dog that attacked him was huge?
I think it was an XL, but I do not want to say that for sure.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Oh, that's just awful. Losing your dog.
And he wasn't even 2 years old.
Oh, and the trauma, compounding the loss is just unbearable. What happens now? What recourse do you have? Do you know anything?
Well, it's going through the police. I know that they don't have insurance on their dog because we went round to their house on the following day.
Right.
But there was no collar on this dog.
No muzzle?
There was no muzzle. Well, no, nothing. There wasn't even a collar to put a lead on to pull him off my dog.
Right.
So, yeah. So at the moment, it's in the hands of the police.
And the reason why you've rung in is because this is another example of you knowing what could be on the horizon and then, God forbid, it actually happened to you.
Oh, yeah, our German Shepherd was classed as a large dog. We've got a Golden Doodle. She's quite a small dog.
Yeah.
So, obviously, I'd be worried. I'm worried about her going out in the garden, even though I haven't heard the other dog since the event happened in the garden. Our community has been absolutely amazing. We set up a GoFundMe page to pay the vet bills because they were going to be.
But the dog's still there. The dog's still next door, or the dog in the other house.
I'm not sure. We haven't heard it. Our neighbours have said that it disappeared, in inverted commas, soon after the event. But the police are dealing with it, and I don't know what outcome there will be.
Well, keep me posted, will you? I just out of interest, whether we do anything on air or not. I just don't know what happens in these sort of situations. And
I did tweet you the GoFundMe link because I met you.
Well, I shall share it.
At a book signing.
Did you? I shall share it shortly. I'll dig it out. We'll send it again. You can imagine what my inbox is like, Louise.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
Send it again now, and I'll retweet it before the end of the programme.
Okay, thank you, James.
No, my pleasure. I'm sorry I didn't spot it sooner. That is exactly the first two calls there. Very happy outcome, the first one, albeit not even a very happy outcome, a horrible outcome in the sense of family division, but at least everyone's still there. And in this case, your dog's not there anymore. It's a real contempt. I've got this bee in my bonnet about people on public transport who don't wear headphones and listen to the noise coming out of their phones and there is something in that about thinking about the people around you, and this is like 10 times that, isn't it? You take that kind of level of contempt for the people around you, but having a dog that is terrorising your neighbours is like that times a million. It's like that times 1,000. I saw a Tory tweeting about the noise on buses, saying, what's happened to society? And I thought, do you think it might possibly have anything to do with having people in charge of the entire country who treat the entire country with complete contempt, who break the rules that they impose upon everybody else, who lie and lie and lie again and then lie about lying, who claim that they've built 40 hospitals when they haven't built any, who insist that they've got all the big calls? Do you think possibly, Tory boy, that the decline in the behaviour of the public might have something to do with the decline in the behaviour of public figures? Because I do. I tell you what, you wait ages for one, Louise, and then two come along at once. This one's in Bromley. Louise, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi there. Good afternoon,
Hello.
James. How are you?
Hello. Very well, Louise. What's on your mind?
Well, basically, it was interesting. It hit a nerve when this topic came up.
Yes.
My brother-in-law, he had the biggest, most... I don't even know what breed it was. It was almost like, not a Staffordshire, but...
They're big. They're not that big. Staffies aren't that big. It can't have been one of them.
It was crossed with something. I don't even know what it was. Anyway, it was, for me, it was big.
Right.
And it was quite aggressive, and it was a powerful dog.
Yes.
And I remember we've got children of the same age, and about, I think my daughter was about 6 at the time, little boy nearly 4. And I actually just said to my husband, we will not be going
This is it, and that means that your brother-in-law or your sister, or was it your husband's brother?
It was my husband's brother, and I said to my husband, I love them, but we are not going.
We're not going round. And what did he say? What did he say?
Round. He said, okay, because he knew from the look and probably the tone of my voice.
And so how long did you not go and see them for? How long did you not go and see them for?
It's not that we know what we would do was we would go to.
You'd meet on neutral ground. You'd meet on neutral ground.
Yes, we still saw them. We still loved them. We met on neutral grounds, but it was under the strict instructions a dog wouldn't come. And then there was an incident.
An incident?
Because he moved house.
Yes.
And the dog got out, and there was an old couple next door, and they were pottering in the garden.
Oh no!
The dog got out. It jumped over, and it ran at them. Now, good job they were near their conservatory. So they got in, and they were safe. They were, and no one.
In the nick of time, though, and they just managed to get into the conservatory. And what happened then? Did he get rid of it?
No, he did not. He apologised to them. They wanted something done, but he said, "Listen, I'm going to deal with the fence. I've just moved in," and somehow he managed to convince them. Now, I was quite cross, because I wanted to secretly phone and say, listen, get rid of that dog.
There's a dangerous dog at number 43.
Yeah, and I did say to him, I said, how can you, we've got children the same age, are you really willing to risk it? And he said, what do you mean risk it? That dog would never hurt one of the children. And then you never guess what happened.
Well, I think I probably can, Louise.
It bit him. No, it bit him.
Oh, good.
And once it bit him, it was then, sadly, the dog had to
go.
Be put down, because from the man that said all this would never go for
you're great. I've got 2 thoughts, Louise. The first is you're one of nature's storytellers. I don't know if you were aware of that. I don't know if anyone's ever told you that. You're a natural storyteller.
Am I? Well, thank you.
No, you really are. And the second thing is, there's a lot of conservatory salespeople listening to this programme who've just thanked their lucky stars for you. I've never heard a better rationale for getting yourself a conservatory than the one you just described. But we can laugh. But everyone knew that there was a bad ending coming, except the fella who ended up getting bitten. And it could have been so much worse, of course. It could have been one of his children. It could have been one of yours. So you do the right thing. I like this conversation in the sense that it clearly is a bigger issue than we've ever allowed before. We've always talked about it in the 2 dimensions of the relation, the human and the dog, but it's of course the bigger dimensions all around. Louise, you take care. I look forward to your next call. Honestly, I'll make myself a cup of tea and sit back next time you ring in, because I'll know there's a cracking tale on the way. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's 12:35, and it's true. It actually happened. I mean, the idea of Liz Truss standing up in public and insisting that she is the answer to the country's problems is beyond parody. I've said this a few times in the last few years. It's the satirists I feel sorry for. But I think that the mewling pencil has gone even further. I think that the penny farthing in human form has managed to go even further down the, what would you call it? The rabbit hole of delusion than even Liz Truss. Henry Riley is there. So, I mean, where do we start, Henry? There is another faction of Conservative MPs insisting that the Conservatives aren't right-wing enough.
Sort of, yes. And this is actually the 12th faction, James, if you're counting, that I've totted up this morning. I think this is the 12th faction. I can go through them, but I think this is the 12th faction of...
have you got them in front of you? Hang on, I'm just getting...
Do you want me to go through them now?
Yes, please.
OK. So this is obviously Popular Conservatives. You've got the ERG, the European Research Group. Yeah. You've got they're a member of the 5 families, by the way. Right. And the New Conservatives, which is Danny Kruger and Miriam Cates, Jonathan Gullis, they're a member. The Northern Research Group, which is Jake Berry.
Right. Just him.
They're also a 5 family. No, he's sort of the leader. Okay. The CRG, the Common Sense Group, led by Sir John Hayes.
That'd be CSG, wouldn't it?
Oh, sorry, yeah, you're quite right. CSG.
Yeah,
that's because
no, that's right, mate. I'm older than you.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
The CGG, the Conservative Growth Group, which is Liz Truss and Ranil Jayawardena. The One Nation Group.
Yeah, they're all right.
Well, yeah, that's Damien Green and a few of the others. The CDO, the Conservative Democratic Organisation, which is sort of allies of Boris Johnson, Dame Priti Patel and Lord Cruddas.
Lord. Yeah, that's 8.
There's the China Research Group, the CRG, which is Alicia Kearns, Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Yeah.
There's the Net Zero Scrutiny Group.
Yep.
There's the Conservative...
Who's in that? Ian Duncan-Smith. Quite a lot of people are in more than one of these groups. That shouldn't be allowed.
Yeah, you are allowed multiple memberships, because today I recognise them all from different groups.
That makes a mockery, because Liz Truss is launching the PopCons today, but she's also in the CGGGG.
She's also in the CGG. And then there's, where do we get
That's
to?
10.
The Net Zero Scrutiny Group.
11.
Yeah. The Conservative Environment Network.
CEN. Yeah.
CEN, yeah. And then the BCC, which is still going, I'm told, the Blue Collar Conservatism, which Esther McVeigh founded in 2012.
And who's in that then?
Well, technically still Esther McVeigh, I think. They do list members that they have. I'm just trying to... They
30p Lee?
No. They identify themselves as, quotes, working class conservatives. Right. But I've only got Esther McVeigh on that one.
Okay, so back to the top. There's a new one. There's a new gang in town, and it's led by Liz Truss.
It's led by Mark Littlewood, who used to be head of the IEA, the Institute of Economic Affairs. He's the director, and he gave the opening and closing remarks today, where he welcomed some of his friends onto the stage. And those friends that he welcomed were Liz Truss, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, Mari Fraser, who you might not have heard of. She's a Conservative candidate for Epsom and Newell, but
she went all the way to America for Donald Trump's inauguration.
She did, and
how dare you suggest that I might not have heard of these people?
No, that's true.
This is my turf. Do we know, is there funding involved in this organisation? If Littlewood is involved, it's always interesting to know where the money's coming from.
Not clear as of yet. I suppose inquiries will be going in after their launch today. And Lee Anderson, by the way, James, was another one.
He's in this one. He's in this new one.
He's in this one as well, yes. And, I mean, it's difficult to know where to start. Firstly, the audience. You had everyone from Lord Frost, Nigel Farage, to David Starkey. It was certainly an interesting bunch of members who were there. Now, Mark Littlewood sort of set the ground, really, by having a go at quangos and said there are over 500 quangos in this country, and said they are ruling Britain at the moment. And then the first speaker was Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg. They all had different arguments, James. The crux of Jacob Rees-Mogg's speech was with regard to international institutions. So he said the Davos man is ruling the country at the moment. He then said that Tony Blair had been, in a way, quite sinister, and he felt that he had purposefully, for instance, tied the UK in with the Equality Act, the Human Rights Act and the Environment Act, which were only there to give power to judges and to sort of bind Parliament's successors, in the word of Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg. He also went on to criticise many international institutions.
How do we allow this country to be properly run and raise the standard of living for all our voters? By giving them freedom over their lives and taking it away from the unaccountable, the faceless, the bureaucrat, and the pious platitudes of pompous politicians which have been running this country for too long. Popular conservatism is the answer.
Sorry, what pardon? He just... Let's use global player, can we? And rewind that.
The pious platitudes of pompous politicians which have been running this country for too long.
So Jacob Rees-Mogg is criticising other people for being...
The pious platitudes of pompous politicians which have been running this country for too long.
Gosh.
Yes, and he wasn't referring to himself. He was referring to Sir Tony Blair and many members of the new Labour government, which he pointed out a bit later on. Next on stage, James, at this sort of huge Conservative Glastonbury was Mari Fraser, who is standing in Epsom and Ewell. As you say, there are those comments about Donald Trump in the past. And goodness me, she made some, for instance, came out unequivocally against the smoking ban. She said it's creating a ludicrous two-tier system. She said once one freedom is surrendered, others follow because the state is no Mary Poppins. Let's not forget Nanny on her most monstrous form, which was the COVID lockdowns. Right. And then she said, it's time to put Nanny to bed.
Did they chant, what do we want? Lung cancer. When do we want it? Now. Was there any of that going on there? Was it? Or
no,
not?
there was a lot of supportive applause, actually, from people in the room for that. Then was Lee Anderson, of course, a familiar face. He said, how many people lie awake at night wondering if we'll get to net zero by 2050? And said there was one Green candidate who he thinks, and no one else lies awake at night worrying about getting to net zero by 2050. Right. He said he's never heard it come up on the doorstep. There was an odd, I'm quoting, by the way, James, there was an odd weirdo Green guy with 20 votes who once raised it with him, he said, and said that people also don't mind where they get their gas from. Said that we should essentially stop the net zero crusade, as he put it. And then Liz Truss was up after that, who got, I have to say, a hell of a reception. In that room of a couple of hundred people, she was treated like sort of...
and this is why she never goes anywhere else. A friend of mine bumped into her recently at the Brit Awards, and she was insisting that she is going to be back and she is going to have another go, and anyone who's written her off is because they don't understand anything. And there is the proof that she has found at least 200 people who are prepared to forget the time she drove the economy off the cliff or blame it on someone else, possibly Gary Lineker.
Yeah, Gary Lineker curiously didn't come up, actually. Oh. But one thing that I did find interesting, James, with regards to Liz Truss is I got the sense she was rather miffed that whilst she did get a rapturous applause, Nigel Farage took away a huge amount of the attention. And afterwards, what was interesting is everyone was flocking to Nigel Farage as opposed to Liz Truss, Jacob Rees-Mogg.
When you say everyone, what do you mean? You mean the people who were there?
I mean the people who, I don't mean sort of people on the street, but it's in the people who were there, i.e. Journalists, i.e. members of this new organisation, New Conservatism. Right. And the thrust of Liz Truss is...
Popular Conservatism.
What did I say?
New. You said New Conservatism.
Oh, sorry. No, Popular Conservatism. You're quite right to correct me on that.
New Conservatism is number 3 on your list.
Sorry.
But just below the ERG and above the NRG.
Thaned you. You're right. I did have that on my list.
I used to get down to some NRG back in the day.
I actually don't know what that means. And then some of the other sort of thrust of Liz Truss's speech was...
Can we never use the words thrust and truss in the same sentence again, please, Henry Riley?
That noted. She had a go at Tory cabinet ministers who she claimed met Greta Thunberg and were pandering to anti-capitalists, and said that the system at the moment, and cited the civil service and Quangos, is, quote, actively working to prevent conservative policies, saying it's very difficult to be a conservative at the moment.
Right. Are we going to hear any of that?
No. Well, no, not at the moment. Thank you.
No, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. I was gearing.
I thought I'd save you from it.
No, I was gearing up for it. I mean, because you say what you like about Liz Truss. She's a magnificent orator, Henry.
She certainly gave the speech that was welcomed by members in the room.
She certainly gave a speech. So Jacob Rees-Mogg, I think just once more, the short version, please. This is surely... I think, who is it's just got in touch and said, Alanis Morissette, Phil says, I just heard Jacob Rees-Mogg's comments and I think Alanis Morissette just exploded.
The pious platitudes of pompous politicians which have been running this country for too long.
Who does he think has been in power since 2010?
I think he would argue this sort of mostly the David Cameron wing of the party.
So he didn't like that?
No, he didn't like that. Well, he hated sort of the Tony Blair New Labour movement a lot more. He kept citing...
That's more than 14 years ago. And Johnson since 2019, he was in the cabinet, I believe, for a few minutes, Jacob Rees-Mogg, running the country.
He's in the cabinet for a while. He was leader of the House of Commons, business secretary, Brexit opportunities minister as well. He had a number of portfolios. But the honest answer is, James, if that charge was put to him, yes, he would say that the reason the Conservatives haven't been able to do anything over the last 14 years is because Tony Blair sought to sort of bind Parliament with these pieces of legislation. Right. And he also cited the creation of the Supreme Court as one of those examples of giving power to judges.
Following on the glorious success of smashing up our membership of the European Union, these are the people who believe that Britain can get even better still by smashing up more relationships with rules-based international institutions or legislation designed to protect, for example, British manufacturers or British farmers. We just need to get rid of a little bit more protection, and we'll suddenly be free.
Yes, three main gripes. Firstly, that legislation that you referenced, Equality Act, Environment Act, Human Rights Act. Yep. Secondly, quangos and commissions, said they've got far too big. UK quangos and commissions, yep, I should add. And then international institutions. They cited the WHO, the World Health Organization, right, the World Trade Organization.
Well, it's only 10 minutes since this lot were telling us that the World Trade Organization was all we needed to come out of the European Union without any trade. It's almost like they don't know what they're talking about from one day to the next. Thank goodness you are there, Henry, to steer us through these choppy waters.
I do my best.
In conclusion, what distinguishes the PopCons from the ERG, the NC, the NRG, the CSG, the CGG, the ONG, the CDO, the CRG, the NZS, the CEN and the BCC?
Certainly not its membership, because that's quite similar. Actually, in fact, I can answer that question because Mark Littlewood cited it right at the start and said the reason we're different is, quote, we're not a loose network of MPs. This isn't seeking to replicate or replace any of the five families. We are working with the Conservative grassroots to achieve conservatism, which is like pushing water uphill at the moment.
And did we ever find out why Mark Littlewood left the so-called Institute of Economic Affairs unexpectedly?
I'm not sure.
No?
No, not sure on that.
Okay. It's 12:49. 12:52 is the time. The Associated Press, which is one of the organisations that the world's media relies on, its journalists go often into areas where broadcasters and newspapers can't get their own people. It's been in existence for 178 years. And it just got its first Oscar nomination for this film.
Someone once told me, wars don't start with explosions. They start with silence. Russians have entered the city. The war has begun, and we have to tell its story. This is painful to watch, but it must be painful to watch.
Вони нанесли бомбовий удар.
Mstislav Chernov is the director of 20 Days in Mariupol, which I should add is also up for 2 BAFTAs, although I suppose, Mstislav, apart from the attention that these nominations and hopefully these awards bring, in the context of the tale that you are telling, they are completely trivial.
I always try to keep in perspective that what happened and what is happening with the film now is because the tragedy that we witnessed and the tragedy that is still happening in Ukraine. When we first started working on the film, it was a story of Mariupol. It was relevant and urgent, and it was 2 years ago. Now it's a story of every city in Ukraine. It's a symbol of those cities that got destroyed by Russian bombs or that are being destroyed right now. As we speak, Avdiivka is being bombed and being surrounded. My hometown is being bombed. Today, 2 months old child was killed in Kharkiv region, and it's also personal. So it's also a story which is personally important for me to tell, and I owe this to people of Mariupol as well.
You got there an hour before the bombardment began, I think, with your photographer Evgeny Maloletka and field producer Vasilisa Stepanenko. If and when people watch the film, which is coming to Channel 4 shortly, the temptation to look away for a viewer is enormous. The harrowing nature of the footage you broadcast, the footage you recorded. I presume there must be times when it's very hard for you to keep filming, to keep telling the story.
When you see the film, and there are much more of those moments.
Yes.
People kept coming to us because they had no connection to outside world. We struggled to send all the materials, but they keep telling us, you have to film this. You have to keep showing the world what is happening. So that gives you energy to continue, because you know that you are trying to give a voice to people.
And an urgency as well, because the spotlight has moved.
You're right. There are so many tragedies happening around the world, and all of them deserve equal attention and respect and care. But I think it's time for many people to understand that they cannot ignore anymore the state of the world affairs, that Mariupol and what is happening in Gaza and what might happen tomorrow in other places is so relevant and can't be ignored.
That notion of this being a warning of what could happen in other places, particularly if Putin were to prevail, is pretty stark, isn't it? I mean, it's reason enough for the film in itself.
Also, sometimes when I hear that people are getting tired of news, they don't watch the news anymore, or they just don't want to react on the news, I always keep trying to explain how would that look at as a perspective. Like, for example, if Russian bombs fall on London every single day, and after a while, and they kill people every day, and after a while, other countries in the world say, we are just tired of this news. We decide not to notice that. That would sound absolutely absurd for people here, right?
Yes, of course it would. But you also understand how it happens. How do people in Ukraine, how aware are they of the decline in attention and interest that the Western media in particular is paying?
They are very aware, and I think because it's a fight for survival, because what happened in Mariupol, what happened in Bucha, in Izium, in Kherson, and what is happening now, it's very clear for them that with or without the international support, they will have to keep fighting, and that's what they will be doing. But that's also why 20 Days in Mariupol is so important, because it just keeps reminding to the wider audiences of what is going on right now.
I think it speaks to the universal, doesn't it? And so it removes perspective. It removes the perspective of being thousands of miles away. It removes the perspective of thinking this is happening on the other side of the world. It brings an immediacy which hopefully breeds empathy when you can imagine it happening, as you say, in your hometown in London. And you can imagine that, then you can feel the horror and the pain of Ukrainian people more keenly, which is a mark of the film's power.
Yeah, it's Ukrainians feel European. Ukrainians feel close to UK, to US, and I have to say that Russia now presents this war to its own people as the existential war against not only Ukraine but against UK, against Europe and US. Russia is officially internally at war with you and with us, with everyone in the West. That can be ignored as well. And Ukrainians, I feel that Ukrainians really want to kind of show that to the world. They want the world to acknowledge that
And albeit that I began the interview by using the word trivial, in fact, if you were to win an Oscar or a couple of BAFTAs, that just gives such momentum to the film. It will reach so many more eyeballs with the attention that these awards bring, I think.
Yeah, it's just otherwise stories, even the most important ones, disappear in the sea of information that surrounds us. They just vanish. So that's the only way to ensure and preserve. And also that's the way to ensure that the story will not be changed by Russia, because they're now occupying the city. They are filming their own videos and their own vision of what happened. And if it's not preserved in documentary, then only the fake reality would exist.
You've written the first draft of history, really, haven't you?
I hope so.
20 Days in Mariupol is an extraordinary piece of cinema, which is going to be broadcast on Channel 4 quite soon, I think. Do we know when yet? Are we waiting for the... Well, I'll keep an eye on that. I'll make sure my listeners know.
The anniversary is coming.
Of course, the 2-year anniversary. And I wish you luck at the Oscars and the BAFTAs, for the obvious reason that the more attention the film gets, the more people will see it. Mstislav Chernov is the Pulitzer Prize winner already and director of the Oscar-nominated film 20 Days in Mariupol. Thank you for finding the time to talk to us today.
Thank you for your time.
If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it for free from your app store or just go to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4, but now on LBC, it's time for Sheila Fogarty. 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 It's time for Sheila Fogarty.